Choose any woman you want, the sheriff said, until the little twin girls said, Papa, that's her. Briar Ridge, Wyoming Territory. Late spring, 1878. The air hung heavy with heat and judgment. In the center of the dusty town square, 3 women stood tied to wooden posts, their arms bound behind them, faces streaked with sweat and soil. Their hair was tangled, lips cracked. There had been no trial, only whispers, accusations of indecency, of corrupting the moral order. Words thrown like stones, and no one had stepped forward to defend them. The crowd gathered as if for a fair, laughter mixed with spitting, murmurs with mockery. Mothers covered their children's eyes, but not their ears. Boys threw pebbles at the feet of the bound women. One of the women sobbed. Another stared into the dirt. Only one kept her chin high, dark-haired, face bruised, eyes hard as iron. Her name was Delilah Quinn. At the edge of the crowd stood a man in a worn hat and dust-covered coat. He was broad-shouldered, his beard trimmed, his eyes gray like a mountain storm. Caleb Whitmore had arrived in Briar Ridge just a few months prior, known only for the horses he bred and the 2 little girls who never left his side. They were 5 years old, June and May, twins, golden-haired and barefoot. They clung to his legs, peeking from behind his long duster coat. No one knew where they had come from. No one dared ask. They called him Papa, and that was enough. The sheriff arrived late, as always, atop a black mare too fine for a man like him, Sheriff Doyle, a man who wore the law like a weapon and smiled with a mouth that never reached his eyes. He rode slow through the crowd, savoring the attention. He pulled his horse to a halt beside the 3 women and looked down, smirking. The sheriff's eyes scanned the crowd until they found Caleb. "Well now," he called out, voice slick with contempt. "Look who came out to watch the show." Caleb did not answer. His hands rested on the shoulders of the 2 girls. "You're a free man, Whitmore," Doyle continued, gesturing toward the 3 bound women. "You're respected, far as that means anything in this hole. Why not take a wife today? You've got 2 little girls need raising. Best they see a woman at your table again." He swept an arm toward the posts like a vendor offering fresh fruit. "Choose any woman you want, Caleb. Take one home, call it marriage, call it mercy." The crowd erupted in laughter. A few women turned away in shame. Others watched, silent, eyes hollow. Caleb said nothing. He stood rooted, his jaw clenched. June tugged at his coat. May reached up on her toes. "Papa," June whispered, pointing with her small hand. "That's her." Caleb followed her finger. Delilah Quinn. Her face was swollen, but her eyes burned clear. She had not spoken all morning, not when they tied her hands, not when the crowd jeered. But now she watched Caleb with something close to defiance, or maybe disbelief. "That's her," May echoed, her voice soft but sure. A hush fell. The laughter died. Caleb stepped forward. One boot, then another, crunching in the silence. He did not speak, did not look at the sheriff. He walked straight to Delilah. She flinched. Only once, when he reached into his coat. Then the blade flashed. With one swift motion, Caleb cut the rope binding her wrists. The hemp fell away, and Delilah gasped, rubbing her bloodied hands. But still, she said nothing. Sheriff Doyle sat frozen on his saddle, his smirk gone. The townspeople looked from Caleb to Delilah and back again, as if waiting for someone to declare it a joke. No one did. Caleb took off his coat and draped it over Delilah's shoulders. Then he turned to the girls and held out his hand. "Come on," he said. They ran to him, wrapping their arms around his legs. Caleb looked once more at Delilah. She nodded. They walked away, the 4 of them, leaving the square silent behind them. Caleb did not look back. "If I must choose," he thought, "between a woman the world calls guilty and a man who hides behind a badge, I choose the eyes that do not look away." The ride to Caleb's ranch took nearly a full day. They traveled in silence, the sun trailing behind them like a watchful ghost. Delilah rode one of his mares, her wrists still raw beneath the sleeves of his coat. He did not speak, and she did not ask. The girls rode with Caleb, one in front of him, the other clinging to his back. They laughed once when a jackrabbit darted across the trail, but otherwise they too were quiet, watching Delilah in the fading light as if she were something sacred and nearly lost. When they arrived, the land stretched wide and open, a modest wooden house nestled against a line of cottonwoods, fences barely holding shape against the wind. Caleb dismounted first. He lifted the girls down, then offered his hand to Delilah. She took it. Inside, he showed her to a small back room, the one with a single bed and a window that faced east. He said nothing of how long she would stay. There was no contract, no condition. She stood in the doorway while he placed a plate of cornbread, beans, and a slice of dried apple on a stool outside her door. He did not knock. The next morning, Delilah woke to the sound of chickens and a child's laughter. She opened the door to find a pair of small boots beside the wall, muddy and worn. June and May sat cross-legged in the yard, braiding grass and whispering secrets. One looked up, smiled, and patted the ground beside her. Delilah stepped out slowly, her bare feet brushing the earth. She said nothing. They did not ask. Later that day, she noticed the younger girl limping slightly. When she knelt to inspect, she found a loose sole, threadbare. She took the boot inside and sat by the fire. Her fingers trembled as she threaded the needle, but each stitch was straight, even. She finished both pairs by sundown. Caleb watched her from the kitchen doorway, arms folded. He did not thank her. That night, he set another plate by her door, again without knocking. As he turned to leave, he paused. "I do not know why they recognized you," he said quietly, "but I trust the instincts of children more than the judgment of men." Delilah stared at the plate, then up at him. She nodded once. In the days that followed, the house settled into rhythm. Caleb rose before dawn, worked the fences, fed the horses. The girls helped gather eggs, swept the floor, and brought water from the well. Delilah did not speak much. But when she did, it was only to the girls, soft tones, gentle corrections, the kind of voice that healed instead of commanded. She never called Caleb by name. One evening, as the wind howled through the cottonwoods, Delilah sat on the steps of the porch, watching the horizon burn red. Inside, the girls slept curled beside each other like two seeds in a pod. Caleb stood behind her, leaning against the doorframe. He did not speak. She did not turn. But in her mind, the voice that had long gone silent whispered, "I was dragged from my home in the middle of the night, called a killer, spit on by those who once waved to me in the market, stones thrown for silence, chains for pride. But no one, not once, looked at me the way those girls did, as if I was something good." She closed her eyes against the wind. And for the first time in years, Delilah Quinn breathed without fear. The wind howled through the cottonwoods that night, colder than it should have been for late spring. It came down from the mountains with the bitterness of winter refusing to die, rattling the shutters and slipping beneath the cracks in the floorboards. Caleb woke before the fire had dimmed, his instincts pulling him from sleep. He heard them first, soft whimpers, barely louder than the wind. When he entered the girls' room, the smell of fever hit him like smoke from a dying flame. June and May lay twisted in their blankets, cheeks flushed, foreheads burning. Their skin was hot to the touch. May kicked weakly against the sheet, her lips cracked. "Too cold, the snow's too cold," she whispered. June moaned, clutching the blanket tighter. "She's singing, 'Don't stop, smells like smoke.'" Caleb moved quickly. He stoked the fire, brought water to a boil, tore cloth into strips for cool compresses. He worked in silence, jaw tight. But the girls kept speaking, murmuring through their fever as if caught in a dream far older than their years. "She held us, don't let her go." At the hallway's end, a shadow moved. Delilah stood barefoot, her nightdress hanging loose, her eyes wide and fixed on the bed. She said nothing at first. Then, softly, "What did they say?" Caleb glanced up, wet cloths in his hands. Something about snow, singing, smoke. Delilah's breath caught, her fingers curled tightly against the doorframe. "Blanket," she said, barely a whisper. "The blanket." She walked forward slowly, each step hesitant. The girls continued to stir, words tumbling out like ghosts. She held us. She was warm. Delilah sank to her knees beside the bed. Her hand trembled as she reached out, then stopped inches from June's cheek. "I remember them," she said. There was a snowstorm, a clearing. They were alone, huddled under a tree. I wrapped them in the only blanket I had. I held them through the night. I sang to keep us all from slipping under. She closed her eyes, voice trembling now. "I tried to carry them, but I slipped. I hit my head. Everything after that is fog. I woke up in a shack days later, bleeding, alone. I thought they had died." Caleb stood silent at the doorway. Delilah looked at the girls, then placed a hand gently on May's burning forehead. "They survived," she whispered. That night, Delilah stayed by their side. She wiped their faces, changed their cloths, spooned broth between their lips. She hummed the same melody from the forest, the wordless song she had once whispered into the frozen dark. Caleb sat by the fire, out of sight but listening. He did not interrupt. He only watched the flicker of light on her face, and the way the girls stilled beneath her voice. In his mind, he drifted back to that bitter winter. He had been riding after a runaway mare near the northern ridge when he spotted something strange, a line of dark stains stretching across the snow. Blood, half covered by new fall. He followed it to a broken lean-to, barely standing. Inside, two little girls, no more than 4, lay curled together in a bundle of wool. They were barely breathing. No one else, no names, no clues. He took them home. "They called me Papa by the 3rd day," he whispered, "and I never had the heart to tell them otherwise." Delilah dipped another cloth, her movements gentle. She looked up but did not meet his eyes. "I am not their mother," she said, "but that night I chose to be." Caleb stepped outside into the cold night air. He walked to the woodpile beside the barn and picked up a piece of pine. Sitting on the edge of the trough, he drew his pocket knife and began carving, slow, steady strokes. By morning, the fever had broken. The girls slept peacefully, cheeks flushed but no longer burning. Delilah sat slumped in the chair, still dressed from the night, the blanket he had given her wrapped around her shoulders. Caleb walked over and laid something on the table beside her, a small, sanded block of wood, the carving still fresh. It read, "Sometimes, home is a memory you forgot you built." He looked at her one more time, at the girls sleeping soundly beside her. "She's not a stranger," he thought. "She's the reason they're still alive." The gossip began like smoke, thin, harmless, drifting, and then caught fire. By week's end, the whole of Briar Ridge was buzzing with talk. They whispered it in the saloon over whiskey, at the feed store between sacks of grain, on porches and pews, and behind the backs of anyone who might listen. "They say he brought her home. She sleeps under his roof." "And the girls? What kind of example is that?" "She murdered her husband, don't forget." The town split like dry wood. Some remembered what Caleb had done, how he had saved those girls, how he kept to himself and paid his debts. They nodded quietly when his name was mentioned, unwilling to condemn. But others, louder, more venomous, saw him now as something tainted. "Sleeping with a killer," they said. "What kind of man brings home filth like that?" It did not take long for Sheriff Doyle to seize the moment. On the following Sunday, just after the church bells rang, he called a town meeting in the square. People gathered, hungry for spectacle, for something righteous to lean on. Sheriff Doyle stood on the courthouse steps, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver like always. "I do not come here to stir trouble," he began, all smiles and spit-shined boots. "But it is our duty, as God-fearing, law-abiding citizens, to protect the moral spine of this town." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. He looked out, voice rising. "We have among us a woman once tried for murder. We have a man, Mr. Caleb Whitmore, who now houses her, with 2 young girls under his care." He paused, letting the words sink in like poison. "I will not stand here and tell you what to think, but I ask you this, what if it were your daughters?" The crowd shifted uneasily. Eyes turned. Behind them, Caleb approached, coat unbuttoned, face calm but unreadable. He stepped forward slowly and stood on the same steps, beside the sheriff. "I have something to say," he said. Doyle smirked and stepped aside. Caleb looked out over the crowd. "I am not a man who speaks often. Most of you know that. I believe in hard work, quiet living, and raising the girls the best I know how." He took a breath. "When I found them, they were nearly dead. I gave them a roof. They gave me a reason to wake up in the morning." He paused, letting his eyes meet the gaze of the crowd, one face at a time. And then Delilah came back into their lives. She did not ask to, she did not demand anything, but they knew her. They remembered the woman who had once wrapped them in a blanket and held them through a blizzard. The crowd was silent now, tension stretched tight as barbed wire. "You call her a killer," he continued, voice steady. "But I ask you, based on what? A story? A rumor? A crime she never confessed to, never convicted for? You want to punish her again? Because that's easier than looking at the truth." He took one step forward. "If a woman's life can be destroyed by whispers, then none of you are clean, not one." There were no shouts now, just eyes, downcast or stunned. Sheriff Doyle's voice rang out sharply, breaking the silence. "Fine words," he said, "but the law is the law. If you want to keep those girls under your care, you need a wife, a household. That is what the court requires." Caleb didn't flinch. He looked back at the crowd. "I did not come here to ask permission. But since it's permission you want," he paused, jaw tightening, "then I will do what the law demands. But I will not do it to satisfy your thirst for gossip." He turned and walked away. Behind him, the wind rose again, dry and cutting. The crowd broke apart, scattered like dust. And Sheriff Doyle, still standing on the steps, watched Caleb go with a smile that did not reach his eyes. The air that evening was thick with dust and silence. A storm brewed far to the west, just a line of bruised clouds hugging the horizon. Caleb sat on the porch, sharpening a blade, the rhythmic scrape of metal against stone the only sound. Delilah stepped out quietly, her arms crossed. Her eyes looked toward the sky, but her voice was aimed inward. "I suppose you deserve to know," she said. Caleb looked up. He did not press her. He only nodded once and set the blade aside. Delilah leaned against the post, the way someone leans when their legs can no longer carry the weight of memory alone. "I was married once," she began. "His name was Thomas Quinn. He was the deputy, Pho Can Sat Trueng, of this very town." She paused, chewing the inside of her cheek. "He was kind, stubborn, but kind. We married young, had plans to leave this place. He wanted a life beyond Briar Ridge. So did I." She glanced at Caleb. "But dreams make easy targets." Her fingers tightened around her elbows. "Sheriff Doyle, he wasn't sheriff then, just another deputy. He used to come by, helped Thomas with patrols. He'd stay longer than needed, stare longer than he should have. I thought it was harmless at first." She swallowed. "Then one night, he cornered me outside the jailhouse, said Thomas was holding him back, said I should be with a man who could protect me." Her voice dropped. "I slapped him," told Thomas. "My husband confronted him that same night." Her eyes were glass now, but no tears fell. "The next morning Thomas was dead." Caleb didn't move. He sat still as carved stone. "They found him shot in the back. No witnesses, no prints. But by dusk, Doyle had already told the town I was seen fleeing the scene. He planted a scarf of mine at the station. And I," she exhaled, hard, "I was arrested before the body was even buried." She looked away. "There was only one person who could have cleared my name, my brother, Elias. He saw Doyle the night of the murder. But Doyle must have known. Elias disappeared that same week. I haven't seen him since." The porch creaked beneath Caleb's shift in weight. The trial fell apart, no evidence strong enough. But that didn't matter, did it? In a town like this, truth isn't what you prove, it's what people already believe. She finally turned to face him. I left. I didn't run. I just stepped away. From everything. I wandered, lived off scraps, learned how to be small enough not to be noticed. Until the day I heard two girls crying in the snow. Her voice broke then, only for a moment. I didn't save them because I'm noble. I saved them because no one had saved me. She knelt beside him now, the moonlight catching her face, softening it into something fragile. I don't care if they ever know. I don't want to be cleared. I don't want revenge. I only want to make sure they never feel what I felt when the world turned its back. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out. Not quick, not dramatic, just steady. He took her hand in his, rough, warm, strong. Her fingers hesitated, then curled around his like roots into soil. It was the first time they had touched without necessity. He did not speak. He did not need to. Delilah looked down at their joined hands. There are people who live to be forgiven, she said softly, and there are people who live so others can breathe easier. Her voice trembled. I am the second. Caleb's thumb brushed over the back of her knuckles, slow and sure. He whispered, and I believe that makes you stronger than most. They sat there like that, two broken souls beneath a crooked sky, holding on to the one thing that had not lied to either of them, each other. The town square was packed tighter than it had been in months, not for a hanging, not for a wedding, but for something rarer, truth clawing its way out of the dirt. Caleb stood beside Delilah near the steps of the courthouse. He could feel the tremble in her breath, though her face was calm as cut stone. June and May watched from the edge of the crowd, hands clutching each other, eyes wide with the unspoken weight of grown-up things. Sheriff Doyle lounged nearby with his thumbs hooked through his belt, smiling. Another town meeting, Mr. Whitmore? He drawled. You got a fondness for drama, or are you just looking to be mayor? Caleb didn't answer. Not yet. Then the crowd parted. A figure emerged, dusty, lean, travel-worn, but unmistakable. His coat was patched at the elbows, and a scar ran beneath his jaw like a crooked river. Delilah inhaled sharply. Elias. Her brother walked slowly toward them, eyes never leaving Doyle's face. I've come back, he said. His voice carried, low, ragged, but certain. And I've brought what should have come with me a long time ago. He held up a satchel, worn leather, pulled tight with a strap. From it, he pulled out a yellowed envelope, folded papers, and a battered wax cylinder, the kind used to record voice on old phonographs. This, he said, raising the cylinder, was recorded the night Thomas Quinn died, the night Sheriff Doyle shot him in the back. Gasps rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Doyle's smile faded. This is madness. He's been gone 10 years. What the hell does he know? Elias didn't flinch. I ran because you threatened to kill me if I spoke, but I never threw this away. And I found the bank drafts, too, proof you forged Thomas's name to transfer title of his land straight into your own pocket. A silence fell, heavy and trembling. Caleb stepped forward. Play it, he said. Elias nodded. A deputy fetched the old phonograph. As the machine cracked and clicked to life, the crowd leaned in. Then came the voice. Faint, grainy, but undeniable. You think you're better than me, Thomas? Think just 'cause you wear a badge and have a pretty wife you can make me disappear? She should have been mine. You both took what I earned, so now I'll take it back. The sound of a struggle, a gunshot. Screams. The recording cut. No one breathed. Delilah's knees buckled slightly, but Caleb caught her. Sheriff Doyle took a step back. That proves nothing, he barked. It's hearsay, old tricks and doctored sounds. Another voice cut him off. We matched the handwriting, Sheriff, said a lawyer from Cheyenne who'd come with Elias. The forged deeds, the stolen money, and now this. Quote. Doyle reached for his revolver, but 4 deputies already had theirs drawn. Don't, one of them said, just don't. They shackled him right there, in front of the people who had once called him law. Some cried, some watched in stunned silence. Delilah looked away, not from fear, but from the kind of tired only truth can bring. As Doyle was led off, she turned to her brother. He looked older, softer, but the boy she once protected was still there in the corners of his smile. "Thank you," she whispered. Elias nodded, eyes glistening. Caleb stepped beside her, and for a long moment he simply looked at the crowd, this town that had doubted, condemned, and now stood ashamed. He didn't gloat, didn't raise his voice. He just spoke the truth. "I didn't save her," he said quietly. "I was just the only one who didn't look away." And with that he took her hand again, openly this time, and led her home. The morning after, the town turned quiet. No more shouts, no more wagging tongues, just the chirp of birds and the creak of wind across the barn roof. The kind of peace that only follows storms, and even then, not for long. Caleb rose before the sun, fed the horses, checked the fence lines. He moved through the motions like a man holding something fragile in his chest. By the time the first light hit the barn doors, he was carving with his pocket knife, each stroke slow and careful. Delilah found him there, crouched beside the stable, surrounded by the earthy scent of hay and leather. He didn't turn when she walked in, just kept whittling. For a moment she watched him, fingers resting lightly on the rail. "You've been out here since before dawn," she said softly. He nodded once. Then, without looking at her, he stood and stepped aside. There on the back of the barn door, where every visitor would see it, where the sun caught it just right, he had carved it deep and proud. Caleb, Delilah, June and May, home. Delilah blinked. She touched the letters with trembling fingers, the groove of her name, next to his. Her voice was barely breath. "You didn't ask me." "I did," Caleb said. "I just didn't use words." He turned to her then, wiping sawdust from his hands. "I don't have a ring," he continued, "don't have the church papers or the preacher's blessing yet, but I have this land, and I have you, and I have them." He paused, the quiet between them, full of something holy. "I put your name next to mine because that's where it belongs. Not because anyone told me to, not because I had to, but because every time I think of the word home, I see your face." Delilah didn't speak. Her eyes filled, but not from the kind of sorrow she'd known before. These were different tears, older, heavier. She walked toward him slowly. And then she nodded, once, sharp and sure. He stepped closer. But she raised a hand gently to stop him. "I'm not saying yes because I'm in love," she whispered. "Not yet. I'm saying yes because for the first time in my life, someone didn't see me as a burden, or a body, or a story already told." Her throat tightened. "You didn't ask me to explain myself. You didn't wait for proof. I was good." He looked at her, quiet, listening. "You carved my name before I could even say it belonged there." Caleb's voice was low. "I didn't have to wait. I just knew." Delilah's lips trembled, then curved into the softest, smallest smile. Behind them, from the house, came the sound of tiny feet running, bare and fast. June and May burst into the barn, messy-haired and breathless, holding up a bouquet of wildflowers tied with twine. "We picked them for Mama," May grinned. Delilah looked at the two girls, their sun-kissed cheeks, their proud little hands. She dropped to her knees and pulled them both into her arms. Not crying from pain, but from something long overdue. Caleb watched them from the doorway, hand resting over the name he'd carved. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. 1 year later, the land had softened. The prairie no longer felt like a place of exile. It felt like home, not because of what grew from it, but because of what had taken root within it. The Whitmore Ranch wasn't large, nor was it the finest. The barn still leaned a little in the wind, and the roof needed patching every other week. But there were chickens now, a goat, a stubborn mule named Percy, and laughter, honest, unguarded laughter that rang through the valley like church bells with no shame. Delilah hung laundry on the line, her dress fluttering like a second flag of freedom. Caleb was mending a fence with June riding on his shoulders, giving instructions far louder than necessary. May was at the porch table with her tongue between her teeth, coloring furiously with bits of charcoal and berry juice. When the drawing was finished, she ran barefoot to her mother, paper flapping in the breeze. Delilah crouched and took it. The sketch was crude but powerful, a woman kneeling in snow, her arms spread wide, shielding two small figures with a blanket. Above them, crooked lines of wind and stars. A single word written in block letters at the top. Mama. Delilah's fingers trembled slightly as she held the drawing. Her throat tightened. She looked at May. You remember that? May nodded. Sometimes I still dream about the snow, but not the cold part, just your voice. Delilah pulled her into a hug and held her tight. Caleb came up the path, June on his hip, grinning. What's this? He asked, looking at the paper. Delilah handed it to him, wordless. He studied it, smiled, then said, so simply and softly the wind nearly carried it away. They called you guilty, but they called you Mama. Delilah met his eyes, and for a moment, all the years of fear and silence seemed to wash away in the light between them. That evening, they sat together on the porch. The fire crackled inside, the scent of smoke curling from the chimney and mixing with cornbread and stew. The sun dipped low, casting long golden shadows over the fields. June leaned against Caleb's chest, already half asleep. May sat curled in Delilah's lap, humming a lullaby she didn't even know she remembered. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The sky above was vast, wild and untamed, but the four souls beneath it were tethered now, not by blood, not by law, but by something far older. A promise made in the snow. A name carved in wood. A family born of fire, forged in storm. And in the fading light of a land that had once only known survival, there was peace. And the smell of ash? It no longer meant ruin. It meant home. In a land where justice was twisted and mercy came slow, a man listened to his daughters, not the crowd. A woman, once condemned, became the heart of a home. And two little girls reminded a broken town what love really looked like. They called her guilty, but they called her Mama. If this story moved you, hit that hype button and subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. Here, we tell the kind of tales that linger long after the dust settles, stories of fierce love, quiet redemption, and hearts that chose right over easy. Ride with us, there's more coming.